In December 2024, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reported that of 626 known populations of a 2-foot American amphibian, only 45 were still stable and reproducing. 45 out of 626, 7%. The animal is not rare, not tropical, and not hidden in some remote wilderness. It lives under flat rocks in ordinary rivers across 15 states. And the reason its nests keep failing turned out to be the last thing anybody expected. Start with the animal, because almost nobody who has waded these rivers knows it's down there. The Hellbender is the largest salamander in North America. Adults run 12 to 29 inches and can weigh up to 5 pounds. A 2-foot amphibian with a flattened head, a broad, flattened body, 4 short, stout legs, a rudder-like paddle tail, and very small, beady eyes with no eyelids at all. The body is built for one job: staying put in fast water. The flattening lets it press against the riverbed where the current is weakest. Rough pads on its toes give it traction on slick rock. Mottled brown and gray-green coloring makes it disappear against a stream bed. Everything about the design says don't get moved, and it has been given a lot of names by people who found one and needed something to call it. Snot otter comes from a defensive slime the skin secretes when the animal is handled, genuinely unpleasant and mildly toxic to would-be predators. Devil dog, mud devil, and Allegheny alligator all come from the same place, something big and unexpected coming out from under a rock and water somebody was standing in. Then there's the skin, which is where the nicknames come from, and there are a lot of nicknames: snot otter, devil dog, mud devil, Allegheny alligator, Grampus, old lasagna sides. That last one is the most accurate. The Hellbender's flanks carry heavy, loose, rippling folds of skin that look exactly like pasta layers. Those folds are not decoration. They're the respiratory system. The genus name, Cryptobranchus, means hidden gill. Adult hellbenders have lungs and essentially don't use them for breathing. Instead, they respire cutaneously, absorbing oxygen directly through the skin, which is why the folds exist. Every wrinkle is extra surface area, and the whole animal functions as a gill. Hold that fact, because everything else in this file follows from it. An animal that breathes through its skin is not simply living in a river. It is continuously exchanging chemistry with every liter of water that passes over it. There is no filter, no lung, no way to hold its breath. Whatever is in that water is in the Hellbender within seconds. There's a second consequence of skin breathing that's easy to miss, and it explains the animal's whole temperament. Cutaneous respiration is passive. It depends entirely on water moving across the surface, which means a hellbender in still water is a hellbender slowly suffocating no matter how much oxygen the pond contains. It needs current, the way a shark needs forward motion. That's why you will never find one in a lake, a pond, a reservoir, or a slow, warm stretch of river. The animal is locked to fast, cold, broken water, and there is no version of it that adapts to anything else. So how old is a design like that? Older than most people would guess, and the fossil record is the reason the word prehistoric in the title isn't hyperbole. The Hellbender belongs to Cryptobranchidae, one of the most basal surviving salamander lineages, a group sitting close to the root of the modern salamander family tree, holding on to primitive features like external fertilization and larval traits carried into adulthood. The Smithsonian's National Zoo puts it plainly: the Hellbender and its ancestors have undergone very little physical change over millions of years, keeping a similar body shape and lifestyle since the time of the dinosaurs, more than 160 million years ago. Read that again. Not that long since some distant ancestor branched off. That long of essentially this animal, doing essentially this under rocks. And the family tree has a strange shape. There are nearly 200 salamander species in North America, and the Hellbender's closest living relatives aren't any of them. They're in Japan and China, the Japanese and Chinese giant salamanders, animals that reach 5 feet, split from a shared ancestor with the Hellbender in the deep Jurassic. 3 survivors of an ancient lineage on opposite sides of the planet, and this is the American one. The individual animals are long-lived to match. Hellbenders reach sexual maturity at 5 to 6 years and can live 30 years or more in the wild. Some accounts put the ceiling higher still, past 50 years for exceptional individuals in captivity. So a Hellbender lifted from a river in West Virginia this summer might have been under that same rock since the early 90s. They're homebodies. An adult typically occupies one stretch of one river for its entire life, sheltering under a single large flat rock and returning to it. One more piece of the biology, because it's the strangest thing about how they feed. A hellbender doesn't chase prey and doesn't use its tongue the way most amphibians do. It opens its mouth abruptly and creates a vacuum, drawing water and whatever's in it straight in. Suction feeding, executed from beneath a rock, on crayfish that wander past. Crayfish are the staple. Beyond that, the diet runs to small fish, insects, worms, snails, tadpoles, fish eggs, and notably, other hellbenders and other hellbenders' eggs. Keep that last item in mind. That's the animal. Now the part that makes it useful to science and lethal to itself, because skin breathing removes every buffer. The hellbender needs cool, clear, permanently flowing, highly oxygenated water. Fast-moving water mixes air in, which is exactly why these animals live in riffles and runs rather than pools, and they are not well adapted to low oxygen conditions. When oxygen drops, a hellbender will start rocking its body back and forth to push water across its skin folds and force more oxygen transfer. It is the amphibian equivalent of gasping. Now add the second requirement, which is the one that has quietly destroyed them. Hellbenders live under large flat rocks. Not near them, under them, in the space between rock and riverbed. That space is where they shelter, where they hunt from, and where they nest. Sediment fills that space in. That's the mechanism, and it is almost boringly ordinary. When soil erodes off farmland, construction sites, and unstable banks, it washes into the river and settles. Silt packs into the gaps beneath the rocks. The crevice a hellbender has occupied for 20 years simply ceases to exist, not destroyed dramatically, just filled. And sedimentation is exactly what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service names first among the threats behind the proposed endangered listing. Sedimentation, water quality degradation, habitat destruction, disease, and direct mortality. Warming compounds it. Warmer water holds less dissolved oxygen, and an animal breathing exclusively through its skin has no way to compensate. It can rock harder, and that's the entire toolkit. Add dams and dredging, which remove the rock structure entirely. Add chytrid fungus and ranavirus. Add collection for the illegal pet trade and anglers who catch one by accident, and believing an old story that hellbenders poison trout streams, kill it. None of that is exotic. There's no invasive predator here, no introduced disease sweeping a continent. It's silt, warm water, and lost rocks in rivers people fish every weekend. And the killing folklore deserves a sentence of its own because it did real damage for a long time. Hellbenders were widely believed to eat game fish and destroy trout populations, and generations of anglers killed them on sight for it. The belief was wrong. The diet is overwhelmingly crayfish. But it persisted for decades, and in a slow-breeding animal that lives 30 years. A decades-long habit of killing every adult somebody happened to hook leaves a hole that doesn't fill in, which is why biologists use this animal the way they use a gouge. If hellbenders are in a river, that river is clean. That's not sentiment, it's a working diagnostic. Because the animal breathes through its skin, requires high oxygen, needs clear water, and cannot tolerate heavy sediment, its presence integrates every water quality variable at once, continuously over a 30-year lifespan. No sampling program does that. You can test a river on a Tuesday and get a Tuesday's answer. A hellbender under a rock has been running the test every second since the Clinton administration. That's why agencies across the range describe them as excellent indicators of water quality, and why Pennsylvania made the eastern hellbender its official state amphibian. The reverse reading is the useful one, and it's why river groups care so much. A stretch of water that has lost its hellbenders has not merely lost an amphibian. It has failed a test that was running continuously for 30 years on every variable at once: oxygen, temperature, clarity, sediment load, and chemistry, and the result came back before anybody thought to check. But an indicator only works while it's there, and the reading it has been giving is bad. The US FWS Status Review found that of 626 documented populations across the Appalachian region, from northern Alabama up through central New York, only 59% remain. Of those survivors, only 45 populations, 12%, are known to be stable and reproducing. 108 have unknown recruitment status, and 218 are actively in decline. Then there's the pattern inside the surviving populations, which is the detail that tells you where this is going. Surveys consistently find that most individuals are older adults, with too few larvae or juveniles present to sustain the population going forward. That's an animal that isn't being killed. It's an animal that has stopped replacing itself. It's worth being precise about what that means demographically, because a long-lived species hides its own collapse. A hellbender that reaches adulthood can persist for 3 decades, regardless of whether it ever reproduces successfully. So a river can hold a healthy-looking count of large adults for 25 years after recruitment has effectively stopped, a population that is technically present and functionally finished, with the ending already determined and simply not arrived yet. Biologists have a phrase for that condition. They call it an extinction debt. And for years, nobody could explain why the nests were failing. This is the part that reframes the decline, and it involves the strangest parenting arrangement in North American freshwater. Hellbender reproduction runs backwards from what most people expect. In late summer and autumn, the male excavates a nest chamber under a large flat rock. He then attracts or corrals a female into it. She lays 2 long strings of eggs, figures vary, but commonly 200 to 400, and a male will often tempt several females into the same nest, with counts as high as 1,946 eggs recorded in one chamber. He fertilizes them externally, drives the females out, and then does something almost no amphibian does. He stays. For roughly 2 to 3 months, the male guards the clutch alone, and he doesn't just sit there. He actively fans oxygenated water across the eggs by rocking and undulating the loose skin folds along his own body, using the same apparatus he breathes with to ventilate his offspring. It is, on its face, exemplary. Then Virginia Tech looked closely. In 2023, William Hopkins and colleagues published work in the American Naturalist on eastern hellbender nests, using underwater artificial nesting shelters deployed across a gradient of habitat conditions. They quantified how often males cannibalize their entire clutch. The answer was often. Whole clutch filial cannibalism was frequent enough to constitute chronic nest failure across the population. Now understand why that matters, because on its own it sounds like a quirk of biology. Filial cannibalism appears in a number of amphibians and isn't inherently pathological. A father may consume eggs to cull diseased or inviable ones, or when he is starving and the clutch is worth less than his own survival. That's a calculation, and in a healthy river it presumably comes out the other way most of the time. What the Virginia Tech work found is that it correlates with habitat condition. In degraded stretches where forest cover has been lost from the banks, where sediment loads are higher, the fathers eat the eggs more. There's a plausible logic to it from the father's side, and it's bleak rather than cruel. Guarding a clutch for 2 or 3 months is enormously expensive. He stays in the chamber. He fans continuously. He barely feeds. If the water is silting in, if oxygen is marginal, if the clutch's odds are poor, and his own condition is deteriorating, then consuming several hundred eggs converts a failing investment into the calories to survive and try again next autumn. Every part of that is a reasonable decision for the individual animal. It is also, repeated across a river system, an extinction, which reframes the whole decline. The rivers aren't killing hellbender eggs directly. The rivers are making conditions bad enough that the fathers do it themselves. There is a hopeful corollary buried in that finding, and it's the reason the research matters beyond diagnosis. If cannibalism tracks habitat condition rather than something intrinsic to the animal, then it is reversible. Restore forested buffer along the banks, cut the sediment load, and the calculation changes, the father's odds improve, and the clutch becomes worth defending. That is a fixable problem, made of fence lines and streamside trees rather than genetics. It is also why the artificial nest shelters exist. Researchers have been deploying concrete nest boxes into these rivers, chambers that mimic the space under a flat slab, but which silt cannot fill in the same way, giving males a reliable, oxygenated place to guard a clutch in stretches where the natural rocks have been buried. And a nest that produces nothing looks, to a survey team, exactly like a nest that was never built. That's how a population of long-lived animals can appear stable for 2 decades while quietly having no future at all, plenty of large adults under rocks, and nothing coming up behind them. The legal story is the part that isn't finished, and in 2026 it got stranger than the biology. The sequence matters. In 2011, the Ozark hellbender, the other subspecies in Missouri and Arkansas, was listed as endangered. In 2019, USFWS determined that the eastern hellbender did not warrant protection. Conservation groups sued in 2021. A federal judge vacated the 2019 decision and ordered a new finding. That new finding arrived on December 12, 2024. USFWS proposed listing the eastern hellbender as endangered throughout its range, across Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. One detail in that proposal is worth flagging because it's unusual. The service determined that designating critical habitat for the eastern hellbender was not prudent, a decision that, for an animal whose entire problem is habitat, drew immediate objection. Then two things happened. The first was Hurricane Helene, which tore through southern Appalachia, the heart of the range, in September 2024. Cleanup volunteers reported finding dried-out hellbenders that had been carried out of the rivers entirely by the floodwaters. Whatever the population numbers were before Helene, researchers expect them to be worse now. Helene is worth pausing on because it exposed something about how fragile the remaining populations are. These are animals bound to specific rocks and specific riffles, in narrow mountain streams with no capacity to relocate and no tolerance for slack water. A flood event of that magnitude doesn't just wash individuals downstream. It rearranges the streambed itself, moving the slabs, scouring the crevices, and dumping enormous volumes of fresh sediment into exactly the gaps these animals need. The habitat that took decades to be worth living in can be rewritten in a single afternoon. The second is procedural, and it's where this currently sits. USFWS was required to finalize protections for the eastern hellbender in December 2025. The agency missed the deadline, and the item's status was changed to a long-term action. In February 2026, the Center for Biological Diversity filed suit in federal court to force the service to set a date. And the context for that missed deadline is a statistic worth sitting with. In 2025, 0 plants or animals were protected under the Endangered Species Act, the first year that has happened since 1981. So the current position is this: a lineage older than flowering plants down to 45 stable populations, whose fathers are eating their own eggs because the rivers have degraded, has been formally proposed for protection, formally found to warrant it, and formally not given it. And the hellbender isn't unusual, it's just legible. The same silt is in the same rivers doing the same thing to everything else that lives under a rock. Freshwater mussels, filter feeders that also cannot move away from what's in the water, are among the most endangered groups of animals in North America. So are darters, mad toms, and a long list of small bottom-dwelling species nobody has a nickname for. The hellbender gets attention for reasons that have nothing to do with ecology. It's 2 feet long, it has a face, it looks like something out of a much older world, which makes it photographable, which makes it fundable, which makes it a candidate for a listing decision. Almost nothing else on that riverbed has those advantages. A freshwater mussel does not get a nickname like snot otter, does not get a state amphibian designation, and does not get a lawsuit filed on its behalf. Which means the hellbender is doing double duty. It is both a species worth saving on its own terms and the only visible representative of an entire riverbed community that has no other spokesman. And its listing decision effectively stands in for all of them. The mechanism repeating across the whole eastern half of the country isn't dramatic and doesn't photograph well. Bare soil moves downhill when it rains. It reaches a stream. It settles into the spaces between rocks. And the animals that live in those spaces, which is a great many of them, run out of somewhere to be. The rocks are still in those rivers. The surveys go out in the autumn, and crews turn the flat slabs over one at a time to count what's underneath. Maybe the listing gets finalized, maybe the nest shelters work, or maybe the rivers stay degraded enough that the fathers keep making the same calculation. What's certain is that an animal which has changed almost nothing about itself since the age of dinosaurs is down to 45 populations, still producing young. That it breathes through its skin, and so has never once been able to look away from what we put in the water. And that under a flat rock in the right Appalachian River tonight, there may still be something that was already there before you were born, flattened, wrinkled, running out of places to be.